thank you for coming to listen to the presentation, which, as described, is preparing for university through the UK's boarding schools. As per the introduction, my name is Martin Cropper. I am Director for Admissions at Shrewsbury School. I myself studied maths at Oxford University. I've then been at Shrewsbury actually as an update now for 25 years, initially as Head of Mathematics, then as Academic Deputy Head, and now as Director for Admissions. Just to give you a little bit of a context, there are 20 or so schools here today which are very much selected from the top UK boarding schools. That gives you a sense of Shrewsbury School, my school, which is a full boarding school, co-educational school from age 13 to 18, and very much one of the examples of big traditional UK boarding schools. Just so you've got a sense of what I'm talking about here in terms of what I mean by top UK universities, and most of this talk will be talking about UK universities. The reason for that is that the vast majority of students in UK schools do go to UK universities. I will talk briefly at the end about US, which would be the second biggest area. I'll talk a little bit about Oxbridge. Now, that's a phrase that's probably familiar. That means Oxford and Cambridge universities. They remain two of the most prestigious universities in the UK. But it's important to see universities as not just that, as looking beyond that. And there is the Russell Group of universities, which is 24 UK universities, generally speaking the elite group, the group of top universities in the UK. What they really have in common is a combination of being cutting edge in terms of teaching and learning, with terrific facilities, which is particularly important if you're looking at subjects like science, where having state-of-the-art lab facilities is very important. They are also research-based universities, which means that there is the opportunity to carry on beyond a first degree to master's degrees and doctorates beyond. It also means that in the learning process you are surrounded by high-level research going on around you, and that acts as an inspiration, and it gives a context to the work that you're doing as an undergraduate. They also are universities that have very, very firm links with business, with commerce within the UK, and so from a networking point of view, they are schools that are good for your future prospects. The list of Russell Group universities does include Oxford and Cambridge. It then includes a number of the London colleges, which are particularly popular amongst many international students. So the LSE, London School of Economics, UCL, King's College London, and a number of other London colleges. But it also includes many of the regional universities, of which those listed there are some of the most popular for international students. Well, what is it that top universities are looking for? Almost all students from these top UK boarding schools will be going on to university, and what is it that the universities want? Well, yes, they're looking for intelligent, clever students, but above all, they're looking for academic potential. They're not just looking for students who are clever, but they're looking for students who have the potential to really grow academically and to develop. Not yet. We're just seeing whether we can get the clicker to work. If not, then I will continue to move across. It works. Fantastic. So here are some phrases that we've put around academic potential. I'm going to start at the top and go round as if a clock face. Intellectual curiosity. Universities want students who want to learn. Universities are looking for students not only who are clever, but want to apply that intelligence. An enthusiasm for learning as well. I think universities, certainly the top universities, are oversubscribed. They have lots of applicants, and in trying to identify the applicants that they will take, they want ones who want to improve, ones who want to develop their learning. An independence of thought. If you're going to go through university and on potentially towards masters and doctorates beyond, then you have to have that sense of independent thinking. Mental agility, obviously, the ability to face unknown, new situations, capacity for critical thought, analytical thought. So the journey through university is not just about being receptive and learning lots of facts and lots of information, but being able to make sense of it and analyse it and develop it. Ability to absorb new ideas. Again, it's this idea of not just staying with the familiar, but being able to engage with the less familiar. A passion for a subject, desire to be stretched. It comes back to this sense of enthusiasm, appetite for learning. Well, how do UK boarding schools promote this and help with this journey? I'm going to talk a little bit about these 4 areas. The first being excellent exam results, because, as I say, these universities are competitive and you need to have the best possible exam results. Developing a passion for the subject. Then actually thinking about the process itself, how we can help students with their application process. It's very well to identify, I want to go and study aeronautical engineering at a particular university, but then we want to help the student actually to achieve their aim. So that's partly through the application form, and then potentially the interview, which we know for some international students is perhaps quite a daunting part of the challenge. So, in terms of the exam results, how do we aim to deliver that? Well, we have experienced teachers, we have highly qualified teachers, and they will be subject specialists. So if you're studying biology in the 6th form, you will be being taught by a biologist. Small 6th form classes, typically a ceiling of about 12, it may go up to 13 or 14, but typically a ceiling of about 12, and most classes will be around the size of about 10, which enables the teacher and the students to develop a really strong working relationship. The nature of being in a boarding school, where all the students are on site and so too are the teachers, is that there is a much longer day to develop that working relationship. So we see the students outside of lessons, the opportunity is there for one-to-one support. We're lucky in that many of these schools will have excellent facilities. Again, I come back to science as one particular area where that's important, but so too in drama, in music, and in a whole range of different areas. In addition, where required, we can provide additional English support. So, for example, at Shrewsbury School, for pupils taking science in our 6th form, we run an additional course for international students, which is partly to help them with some of the technical words, so some of the terminology in the science subject, but also works some of the practical skills, because we know that there are some examples of students who join us in the 6th form who may have a very strong background in science theory, but perhaps slightly less exposure to practical work. And so we aim there to give additional help. I talked earlier on about this idea of a passion for the subject, and I think amongst all of these areas, this is perhaps the one I want to give the biggest emphasis to. We're aiming really for students to develop a real interest in something. When they join us, whether that's at year 9 or year 10 or year 12, they probably already know that they're science focused or they're humanities focused or something like that. But the next step beyond that is to develop beyond being a scientist to being, am I an engineer or am I a physicist? Or am I computer science or maths or biology or biochemistry? And then within those, potentially to narrow down further. So I'm an engineer, but am I an aeronautical engineer, a mechanical engineer, a marine engineer, an electronic engineer? Sometimes you want to narrow down to that level of detail. Sometimes you'll remain as a general engineer. But what we're aiming to do really through the 6th form is to help girls and boys to develop their interest to that level of detail. How do we do that? Well, partly because the teachers are subject specialists. They will be enthusing. You might be taught biology by a marine biologist who might have in the corner of his lab an aquarium. And I can think of particular examples because our head of biology happens to be a marine biologist and happens to have an aquarium in his lab. And I can think of particular students who went on to do marine biology at university because their appetite had been whetted by seeing that ecology in the lab in front of them. But beyond that, there are extracurricular, sometimes called supercurriculum opportunities, which come through visiting lectures. Many of the schools here will have a strong programme of incoming lectures, often by people from universities who will come in. At Shrewsbury, for example, we have a weekly lecture series, and one week it might be a science lecture, and then a history lecture, and then a geography lecture. And they will be coming in and talking about an area that is not particularly on the syllabus. Again, the aim being here that actually that talk about nanotechnology I found really fascinating. That's where I want to take my future. We will take visits to universities. Many of the universities operate student lecture series, so I'm a maths teacher myself. I will take groups to Birmingham University for student lectures. And again, you're hearing from national figures there, and students may hear a particular talk on the statistics behind epidemic spreads or something like that, and suddenly think, oh, that's really interesting. That could be where I want to see my future lying. We take part in competitions. On the science side, that may be Olympiads, national competitions. On the arts and humanities side, that's probably going to be essay-based competitions. Again, it's the opportunity to pursue an interest beyond simply the curriculum. And then academic societies, most schools here will have a range of those. We have a science society, a history one, art history, geography, maths, and so on, which is an opportunity to share interests, sometimes for students to present a short paper themselves. All of these coming back to this idea of promoting the passion for the subject. We then move on perhaps to the nuts and bolts of actually making the application. And all the schools here will have a powerful universities department. At Shrewsbury, we call it a futures department because we want to embrace universities, but also gap years, work placements, and the whole range of future prospects. But that department will help each individual pupil. At Shrewsbury, we have 200 students graduating each year, going on 200 different pathways. And it's really part of the excitement is to help each of those to find their way through. The subject teachers themselves will usually have attended these top universities. They will have been through the process themselves. They will be able to advise based on their own experiences. And that advice will really go through a process of helping to advise on which universities to apply to. In the British system, you apply to 5 universities, slightly different for medicine, but 5 universities. And the aim there is that students are picking a good selection so that they're picking 1 or 2 that are really going to push them and will be giving offers at the top end of what that student might hope to get, but also that there are 1 or 2 slightly lower down which are acting as insurance offers to make sure that even if not everything goes quite according to plan in the exams, that student has still got offers that will take them forward. We will then help the student actually in completing the application form. We all know there is a skill involved in that, whether it's applying to university or applying for jobs later in life. There are ways to sell yourself successfully, and there are ways to not sell yourself very successfully. So that's partly helping them to make sure that the application form is seriously polished and accurate and careful and looks professional. It also includes a personal statement, which each student has to craft. It's important to really look at that word, personal statement. The student has to write this. You occasionally hear a sense that, oh, well, you can get somebody to write your personal statement for you. I'm afraid that's a lot of nonsense, because ultimately you stand and fall by your personal statement, and it has to reflect what you are. So the way that we would go about that is that a student would make a first draft of it, and then the teacher would help them to fine-tune it so that it really was selling them in the most positive way. And then preparation for interview, which I'm going to come on to next. In many, not all, but in many of the applications for the most competitive universities, it does involve an interview. And that will be a subject-specific interview. That is not an interview which is going to spend 10 minutes talking about current affairs and the world outside and so on and so forth. It will be a maths interview, or an engineering interview, or a geology interview, or whatever it might be. And again, if we look at some of the points here, again, I'll sort of go round as if a clock face. It doesn't work quite as neatly there. But we start with this point. I mean, it's assessing knowledge because, you know, by the time you're applying to university, you are expected to know things. You are expected to have a kind of body of facts, but also this flexibility of thought that I talked about earlier on. Universities are looking for more than somebody who's just been a sponge, who's been able to learn lots of facts, but somebody who can actually use them and apply them. So what might you find in an interview? Well, in the sciences, you might be given something practical to do, you know, a biology specimen to discuss, or in physics, perhaps an experimental setup to describe or to work on a little bit. In arts, you might get a text to discuss, so you might be given something half an hour before the interview and be asked to read that and then come in and comment on it. In some subjects, you will have submitted work in advance. In others, and this bottom right one is very much how maths interviews sometimes go. It's almost like a little maths lesson or a little tutorial, and the interviewer might give the student a problem, a maths problem. Sometimes they'll have had it half an hour beforehand, sometimes they won't. And what the interviewer is looking to see there is really how the student's mind works. They may be able to solve the problem, they may not, but it's really seeing how they go about it in real time. Gives a sense of what's sometimes described as teachability. So the interviewer is trying to assess whether this is a student who will be receptive, who will pick things up. Application of existing knowledge to new situations. Again, it's this idea of flexibility of thought. Challenging questions. Yes, again, that could be science-based. And then up at the top left, this idea of discussing things in your personal statement. So typically we would be recommending in a personal statement that a student does mention some areas that they're particularly interested in. But what's very important is that they can then discuss them and develop them. How do we help to prepare for interview? Well, I think I'll draw out two things here. One is a sense that there are ways in which we kind of help to prepare. But actually, above all, I'm going to give a sense that the very nature of being in a boarding school environment naturally helps to prepare. So this top one, the idea that you've been working in a class of about 10 people, naturally will have improved your communication skills, because naturally you will have been talking about your subject day in, day out. The one-to-one tutorials help. Typically students there will have sessions with a maths teacher, a biology teacher, whatever it might be, and that again is kind of honing their ability to operate in a one-to-one situation. We will give formal interview practice. So example, in our maths department, where we have students applying for maths at university, they will have interviews from members of the department who don't teach them. We have a department of about 15 maths teachers. And so in any given year, I will give practice interviews, but to girls and boys that I haven't taught, because that means that when they come into the interview, there is that sense of being with somebody who, whilst they will recognise me, they've not been taught by me. And that's very different to a practice interview with someone who's taught you 4 times a week for the last year. And this final point, particularly for international students, I think is really important. The sense of having lived in a boarding community, whether it's for 2 years or 4 years or 5 years, will inevitably have improved your communication skills. You will be much more confident in being able to just talk naturally and discuss in English. So, hopefully that's taken us through. I said at the beginning that I would just mention as well US universities. At Shrewsbury and other similar schools, we're still seeing the vast majority of students are going on to UK universities, and one of the typical pathways for international students is to come to British schools in order to access British universities. We're seeing a small growth in those going to US universities. Indeed, our universities advisor this very week is actually over in the US visiting a number of universities and networking there with admissions tutors. So schools like ours will be able to provide assistance on US applications. We are the local SAT testing centre. We operate a US universities conference every 2 years, and we have a small flow of pupils going to US universities. So our advice would be worldwide, although in practice of our 200 students graduating in a year, probably 180 of them are going to UK universities. So, if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask in open forum, then please do. You may well have questions that you prefer to ask personally afterwards, in which case I will be at my desk in 5 minutes' time. But yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to ask you, mentioned that some small students go to the US, right? How do you decide to go to the UK or the US? And I mean, what makes them choose the US?
Yeah, good question. So, I would say we have a year group of 200. It is probably the case that about 25 of them weigh up US and UK. So a relatively significant number at least consider the option. And what they do is they will start to engage with the process of fact-finding both in US and UK. What it is that draws to US, in some cases, is the ability to remain quite broad-based. And so UK university courses tend to be quite specialised. So you go to study mathematics, you go to study engineering, you go to study history. There are some broader-based subjects in the UK. So, for example, you can study politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford. You can study liberal arts at Durham. And these are examples of broader subjects. But within the US, certainly in the first year, it is possible to do a broader base of subjects. So I think some students are drawn to that. In our case, there are some students who are drawn by particular athletic programs. So we will see some of our students going to the US because they are footballers or they are a tennis player or something like that. And there are scholarship programs in the US that cater for that. I think what we see is a number of our students explore the idea of a US university and may even go through the process of applying. But our experience is that the majority of them actually end up back with UK universities because actually they find that the UK universities have just as powerful a worldwide reputation. And when one looks at league tables of top universities, the top UK universities hold as many top places in that league as America will do. And I think the nature of life in a British boarding school kind of naturally moves on to life in the UK universities. So I think that's why we see such a majority coming. It will be interesting to see in 5-10 years' time whether there is much of a swing to the US. I'm not sure there will be, but there might be.